You already know more than you think. You just don't know how to read the signs yet. Every person leaves clues, trails of their truth scattered across their words, their habits, their silences. But no one ever teaches you how to notice them. And that's where it all begins to change. Nietzsche once said that people don't speak from truth. They speak from fear, from ego, from habit. What you hear on the surface isn't the whole story. It's a mask, a rehearsed performance designed to protect what's most vulnerable underneath. And unless you've been taught how to listen differently, you'll miss what actually matters. This isn't going to be one of those quick lists or surface-level summaries. What you're stepping into is something deeper, a complete unraveling. 3 parts, each one pulling you closer to the core, each one building upon the last. Miss one and you'll miss the thread that ties it all together. But if you stay with it by the end, you won't just read others. You'll start to read yourself. From the moment you're born, you're trained to trust words. Words become the currency of understanding. But Nietzsche warned language is deceptive. It's not a mirror. It's often a mask. Because when people speak, they don't always speak from truth. They speak from survival. They speak from the versions of themselves they think will be accepted. They speak from wounds they haven't healed. So when someone seems overly kind, maybe they're not just kind. They might be terrified of being disliked. When someone seems tough or unshakable, maybe they're not strong. They might just be hiding how fragile they really feel. And the most confusing part, they don't even realize they're doing it. Because most people are actors in a play they didn't write. Their smiles, their jokes, their tone, it's all shaped by what once kept them safe. Nietzsche said, every profound spirit needs a mask. But he didn't say it with judgment. He said it with awareness. Not all masks are malicious. Some are necessary. But don't confuse the mask with the person. And here's the truth. Nobody talks about people leak the truth all the time. Not in what they say, but in what slips through the cracks. In the way they laugh too long. In the way they flinch when a subject comes too close. In the way they suddenly go quiet when the conversation hits a nerve. The truth leaks not in the performance, but in the tension. Watch for the tension, because that's where the real person begins. That's Nietzsche's first psychological truth. Everyone wears a mask to survive. Not because they're fake, but because they're afraid. Society doesn't reward rawness, it rewards adaptation. So people create a version of themselves that feels acceptable, safe. But no mask is perfect. They slip. And when they do, that's your first glimpse of truth. Truth number 2. What someone hates in others often reveals what they're hiding in themselves. Nietzsche understood projection long before psychology gave it a name. When someone mocks arrogance constantly, they're often wrestling with their own insecurity. When someone fixates on calling others fake, they're usually suppressing something they can't admit. It's not just criticism, it's confession. We criticize most harshly the things we haven't made peace with in ourselves. So when you want to understand someone, don't just listen to what they praise. Watch what they condemn and ask why. Then there's the silence. Because silence, unlike words, doesn't lie. Nietzsche didn't trust talking. He saw language as a herd tool, something people use to blend in to escape discomfort. But when someone hesitates before answering, when they give a rehearsed line that feels too clean, when they change the subject too fast, that silence speaks volumes. The avoidance is the admission. The gap is where the fear lives. Fourth truth: excessive virtue is often disguised vanity. Beware of the person who loudly proclaims their morality. The one always correcting, always preaching, always declaring their goodness. Nietzsche called this the will to power in disguise. It's not that morality is bad, it's when it becomes performative. When it's no longer about values, but about identity. When someone insists too loudly on being pure, they're usually hiding the parts of themselves they've rejected. Real goodness doesn't announce itself, it moves quietly. Fifth, people don't lie to you first. They lie to themselves, and this one changes everything. When someone says, "I'm fine," or "it doesn't bother me," or "I don't care," they may not be trying to deceive you. They may truly believe it because they've said it to themselves so many times, it's become their reality. Nietzsche didn't see self-deception as weakness. He saw it as survival. A fragile mind protecting itself from the truth it isn't ready to face. So when someone's story doesn't add up, don't assume they're manipulating. You realize they've been spinning that story long before you ever heard it. Sixth truth: where someone feels superior, they're usually hiding deep inferiority. Nietzsche believed that superiority is often just overcompensation. When someone constantly reminds you of their achievements, when they casually put others down, when they always need to be the smartest or the best, it's rarely about strength. It's fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being forgotten. Real confidence doesn't need to compete. It just exists. So what does all of this mean? It means that reading people isn't about manipulation. It's about awareness. It's not about decoding them so you can win. It's about seeing them fully so you can connect. When someone interrupts you constantly, maybe it's not rudeness, it's a fear of being overlooked. When someone overshares happiness on social media, maybe it's not joy, it's a plea to be seen. When someone avoids eye contact while saying "I'm okay," maybe their body is telling the truth their mouth can't. Use these truths not as weapons, but as mirrors. Because the more clearly you see someone, the less you judge them. The more you understand their pain, the less you react to their behavior. And maybe that's what Nietzsche really wanted. Not for you to see through people so you could control them, but so you could stop being fooled. So you could stop projecting your own confusion onto others. So you could stop believing every smile, every joke, every mask, and start seeing what's underneath. Because if you've ever looked at someone and felt like something was missing, like the surface wasn't the whole story, it wasn't. If you've ever wanted to understand what people aren't saying, this is where it begins. You don't need to dig deep to see someone's mask. You just have to pay attention to the moment it starts to slip. That small flicker in their eyes when they're confronted. The shift in tone. The pause. The laugh that lasts too long or comes too soon. These aren't glitches, they're signals. And if you've ever noticed them even once, you already have the gift. You just haven't trusted it yet. People often assume that the most manipulative tactics are loud, aggressive, dramatic. But the real ones, the ones that shape relationships and distort entire lives, are quiet. They whisper. They echo your own thoughts. They make you believe they're part of who you are. That's why they're so hard to detect. They don't just confuse your view of others. They confuse your view of yourself. Nietzsche didn't believe the self was a solid thing. He saw it as performance, a layered act constructed to survive a world that rarely accepts you as you are. And when that performance gets threatened, when the script no longer works, that's when the truth begins to bleed through. So let's start here. Most actions are driven by unconscious fear. This is the seventh truth. Think about the last time someone over-explained themselves, or dominated a conversation, or disappeared without warning, or said yes when everything in their energy screamed no. Why do they do that? Fear. Not malice, not confusion. Fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of disapproval. Fear of humiliation. Fear of failing. Most people don't act from desire. They act from defense. So if you want to read someone, don't ask what they want. Ask what they're afraid of losing. That's where the real story lives. And what about criticism? We're surrounded by it. Online, in conversations, in ourselves. But criticism is rarely neutral. Eighth truth. When someone criticizes too much, they're revealing themselves. The man who mocks emotional people, probably terrified of his own emotions. The woman who belittles others' looks might be at war with her own reflection. We think people attack because they see flaws in others. Often they're reacting to flaws they see in themselves, ones they haven't accepted. Projection isn't just a psychological concept. It's a confession. It's the psyche's way of saying, I see something in you that I'm not ready to admit lives in me. So when someone constantly targets a specific trait in others, look beyond the insult. Follow the thread back to them. What part of themselves are they disowning? Confidence can be just as misleading. Because confidence, when it's genuine, is quiet. But when it's loud, when it's relentless, it's often covering something else. The ninth truth. Guilt hides behind false confidence. You see it in leaders, in performers, in people who seem so sure of themselves they never blink. But pay attention. Watch the micro-expressions, the tight jaw, the way they over-prepare, the snap in their voice when questioned. Nietzsche observed this over and over again. People who project certainty often do it because they're terrified of being seen truly seen. Maybe it's something they regret. Maybe it's something they were told to be ashamed of. So they bury it in a performance of control. But true peace doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to prove anything. It just is. And if someone seems too confident, don't be intimidated. Be curious. The next sign is subtle, but once you see it, it's impossible to unsee. The 10th truth. Exaggeration is a leak. It's the ego trying to shout over the voice of doubt. Someone says, I don't care what anyone thinks, but they post obsessively. They scan for likes. Someone claims, I'm always happy. But you can feel the heaviness in their tone. Nietzsche believed that extremism in any form, extreme positivity, extreme certainty, signals imbalance, not strength. The louder the claim, the more fragile the truth underneath it. So when someone says something that sounds too absolute, don't challenge the content. Look for the insecurity behind it. Ask, what are they trying to silence? Now let's talk about control. 11th truth. Those who seek control often fear inner chaos. We all crave some kind of order. But when someone needs to control every outcome, every detail, every person, that's not strength. That's fear. The more someone micromanages the external, the more out of control they feel internally. Nietzsche saw this clearly. When the inner world feels unstable, the outer world becomes a battlefield of control. So if someone can't handle surprises, if they lash out when things don't go as planned, it's not because they're powerful, it's because they're scared. What looks like dominance is often desperation. The 12th truth is perhaps the most haunting. The louder the performance, the emptier the core. Look around. Social media is full of it. The curated images, the constant updates, the hyper-polished identity. It's a non-stop play. But Nietzsche didn't see this as vanity. He saw it as pain. When someone performs constantly, it's usually because they don't believe they'll be seen or loved without the show. They don't trust that their raw self is enough. So they paint it, polish it, perfect it, hoping anyone will applaud. But the person who truly knows who they are doesn't need to be watched. They don't need the spotlight. Their value isn't based on visibility, and maybe you've started to feel it. The shift. You walk into a room and the words don't grab you first. The patterns do. You see the person who interrupts constantly, and you sense the fear of being invisible. You hear the friend who brags endlessly, and you feel their longing for validation. You watch the quiet one in the corner, and you wonder what kind of storm they're hiding behind the silence. You're not reading minds, you're reading masks, and Nietzsche handed you the lens. This isn't about control, it's about connection. It's not about exposing people. It's about finally understanding why they behave the way they do and what that means about you. Because every one of these truths is also a mirror. They're not just about the people around you. They're about you. Your patterns, your fears, your performances, your past. If any of this has resonated, if something inside you is quietly whispering, "I do that too," then you're already halfway there. Awareness is the beginning of real freedom, and what's coming next takes that even further. You've started to see it now, not just in them, but in you. The way old fears dress up as certainty, the way childhood echoes in adult conversations, the way we all in some way are playing out stories we never got to finish. This is where it goes deeper. Because the 13th truth is this: no one truly speaks from logic. They speak from pain. We imagine people as rational. We debate facts. We judge opinions. But Nietzsche believed those are just costumes. Underneath logic, there's always a wound. A person might say, "I don't believe in love." But listen closer. They're not stating a fact. They're protecting a scar. People form their beliefs from what broke them and then use logic to defend the debris. So when you find yourself confused by someone's worldview, try not to ask, "Why do they think that?" Instead, ask, "What happened that made them need to believe this?" You'll stop reacting to their words and start recognizing their shields. And then, the 14th truth, how someone reacts to weakness reveals their true power. We're taught to admire strength, but strength without empathy is just performance. Nietzsche saw real strength not in dominance, but in restraint. How does someone treat the person who has nothing to offer them, who can't fight back? That's where their real character lives. If they mock vulnerability, they fear their own. If they punish mistakes, they were probably never allowed to make any. If they always win but leave everyone else bleeding, they're still fighting ghosts from their past. But the person who can sit with pain without needing to fix it, who can forgive what they had every right to judge, That's someone who has made peace with their own shadow. They no longer need to prove they've won because they already did internally. The next truth cuts quietly. When someone fears being forgotten, they chase attention. You've seen it. The friend who always needs to be the center of the story. The person who turns every silence into spectacle. It looks like confidence, but it's not. It's a cry. Nietzsche believed the hunger to be seen was often born from the terror of being invisible. Some people aren't seeking fame. They're running from the silence. They fear living a life that doesn't leave a mark, so they perform, exaggerate, provoke. Not because they crave the spotlight, but because they fear the void. If you can see that, you'll stop rolling your eyes. You'll start wondering what part of them still believes they don't matter unless they're noticed. And now, one of the hardest to admit, the person they attack is often the person they envy. This is truth 16. It's easier to criticize than to admire. It's easier to tear someone down than to admit, I wish I had that too. So pay attention. The colleague who gossips about someone's success, the friend who mocks someone's confidence, the online stranger who hates people who shine. They're not just being mean, they're being haunted. To see someone embody a version of you that you gave up on is to feel the grief of what you abandoned. And envy at its root is just desire we think we don't deserve. When you see this clearly in others and in yourself, you become untouchable. Because the moment you recognize envy for what it is, it loses its power to poison you. 17th truth. People don't act from beliefs. They act from childhood. We grow up thinking we've changed, that we've evolved past what hurt us. But most of us are just reenacting what we never resolved. The person who was never heard. They interrupt. The one who had to earn love. They perform endlessly for attention. The one who was punished for feeling, they now hide behind logic and cold control. Nietzsche would say, people don't change, they repeat. Until they see the loop, they live inside it. If you want to read someone's behavior, don't just look at who they are now. Ask who they had to be to survive. Their present is often just their past in disguise. And the final truth, the 18th, is the one that brings it all together. People confess through their patterns. They may not say the words, but they show you. Over and over. In the way they ghost when things get too close. In the way they overwork to avoid themselves. In the way they chase connection but run from intimacy. These aren't random behaviors. They're stories. If you watch closely, you'll see them. If you listen without judgment, they'll tell you everything. The problem is, most people never feel safe enough to speak it out loud. But their behavior never lies. Nietzsche believed that if you can learn to read these patterns not as problems, but as unspoken truths, you'll begin to hear people before they speak. And when you do, something shifts. You stop taking things personally. You stop labeling people as toxic or cold or fake. You start realizing everyone is just protecting something soft, something scared, something real. And when you see that, you don't get weaker. You become stronger. Not because you've outsmarted someone, but because you've stopped needing to. You become a mirror, not a weapon. You reflect. You hold space. You recognize that their pain doesn't need your judgment. It needs your presence. And maybe most importantly, this isn't just about reading others. It's about reading yourself. Because every one of these 18 truths isn't just a lens for the world. It's a mirror. A soft, sobering look at your own habits, your own armor, your own story. What parts of you are still wearing a mask you didn't choose? What parts of you are still reacting from fear from childhood? From wounds you never asked for? Nietzsche didn't want us to become manipulators. He wanted us to become awake, to see clearly, to stop mistaking behavior for essence, to understand that what we admire in others is what we're allowed to become, that what we criticize might be what we fear inside ourselves. So if this opened something inside you, if a quiet voice said, "That's me," don't ignore it. Drop a comment and share which truth hit you hardest. Let's build something honest together in a world full of masks. And if this spoke to you, subscribe. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of learning to see what's hidden and becoming who you really are.